Okay, and with that, I would like to introduce our panel moderator, Mithi, who will be moderating our panel of med school graduates. Please go ahead and turn your video on and we'll get started.
Hi everybody, my name is Mitty. I am going to be moderating the panel today as well as answering some of the questions. I wanted to start with, again, just welcoming all of you. It's the 7th session of our Med Mentor Mondays. Today what we're going to be doing is talking with a couple recent graduates of medical school and now like newly minted physicians. Before we begin, we just want to share our statement. We want to acknowledge the pain caused by deep-rooted, pervasive, and systemic racism and police brutality in this country. We will continue to raise the voices of people fighting against racism and oppression. We grieve and stand in solidarity with our Black colleagues and community. We also recognize the additional challenges that pre-med students of color face. If you need additional support at this time, please feel free to reach out to us. We have our contact information here in this session. Again, if you have additional questions that we're not able to get to in this session, we'll try to address it at the end, or we will address it through the Ask the Med Mentors form. So I am going to introduce some of our speakers today. So I'll be moderating. Again, my name is Mitty. I'm a UCLA grad, double Bruin. Graduated in 2006 and then started medical school in 2016. I matched internal medicine at UCSF. I'll go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves as well. Maybe I'll start with Barbara.
Hi everyone. I went to UCLA as an undergrad and came to New York at Cornell for med school and recently matched into emergency medicine at NYU Bellevue.
Ernest and David.
Hi, I'm Ernest. I grew up in San Diego, but I went to college at Caltech over in Pasadena. And then in 2012, I started at here at UCLA in the MD PhD program. So I just recently graduated and I matched to dermatology at UCSF, but I'll have 1 year here at Cedars for my prelim year before that.
Hi, I'm David. I went to Pomona College for undergrad, graduated in 2011, and then also started an MD PhD program at UCLA and just graduated and I'm going to internal medicine at NYU.
Thanks everybody. We're also hoping that we will be able to be joined by now Dr. James Lee, who's going into neurosurgery at the Mayo Clinic. He is experiencing some challenges right now with coming in, but we'll hopefully be able to welcome him into the session a little bit later. All right, so I'll go ahead and start with the questions. We have a couple of questions that are sort of preset that we'll go through, and again, if there's additional time, we'll answer additional questions at the end. The first question is, to tell us a little bit about yourself. Is there anything about your path to medicine that may be unique or any challenges you overcame? And I'm going to mute myself and see if anybody would like to start off with this particular question.
I'll answer that question. So I started college, community college at Cerritos, and I transferred to UCLA. Throughout my stay at UCLA, I was undocumented. And after graduating, well, throughout UCLA, we advocated for deferred action for childhood arrivals and the California DREAM Act. So when I graduated, I had DACA. And then I decided to apply to med school, and luckily before I started med school, I became a US resident. So one of the biggest challenges were financial, but also just a lot of barriers along the way due to immigration status and all of that. And I think we'll hit these topics later, but somebody asked about postbacks. I started doing more classes after I graduated because I had been out of school for a little bit. And and also just to make sure that people knew that I was still very interested in the sciences and medicine in general.
I guess I can talk a little bit about my path. I think in some ways, my path into medicine was both traditional and non-traditional. Traditional in the sense that I went straight through undergrad, graduating in 2012, started here at UCLA, but going into college and even halfway through college, I even wasn't sure I was going to go into medicine. I was really passionate about basic science research. That's why I ended up applying to MD PhD programs. But when I started in college, I was actually interested in theoretical physics. That's why I went to Caltech. I wanted to learn from the Nobel laureates in physics, and so I didn't really open my eyes to a career in medicine until I ended up joining a research lab that collaborated very closely with physicians and physician scientists. We were using quantum computers basically to design molecules and drugs for use in humans, but from really first principles. And so starting from a research standpoint, I got to meet and work with physician scientists, MD PhDs, who had clinics. They would see patients, but they mainly did research in their laboratories, and that really appealed to me. So I decided to switch my career track from going into physics more into biophysics and clinical medicine. And so that's basically what I have been doing since then. I decided on pre-med, I think, halfway through. So Caltech is interesting because they make you take a lot of courses that are actually pre-med requirements, even though you aren't pre-med. So organic chemistry, things like that. It wasn't difficult for me to switch in that sense, to have all the prerequisites, but I know a lot of people took years off either to do research or to take additional course requirements. That wasn't an issue for me, but in terms of challenges that I overcame, I think the main challenge was transitioning the way I studied and how my mind worked from thinking about things in math and physics and to transition to the memorization focused studying patterns in medical school. That was really the main challenge early on. But I found that a lot of the things that I learned from being a non-traditional applicant in that sense, coming from a different field into medicine, gave me unique perspectives into thinking about clinical medical problems. So it's not a bad thing to switch fields.
Yeah, I'd echo what Ernest said. I think I was a very traditional applicant. I applied right after graduating from college, and I kind of went into college as a pre-med. The only thing that I was thinking about was whether to apply MD, PhD, or MD. And so that kind of decision, I'm happy to talk about. Anybody can reach out to me. It's kind of a more niche scenario, but otherwise I don't have that many. It was a fairly standard path, I think.
And then I can answer the question as well. So I was a very non-traditional applicant. Similar to Barbara, I was undocumented during the time that I was in undergrad here at UCLA, and eventually became a DACA recipient and applied to medical school as a DACA recipient. So I had a 10-year gap going from like when I graduated from UCLA to when I started medical school. I think some of the challenges that I overcame, in addition to sort of navigating what it's like to figure out all of the different barriers of my immigration status, was, one, I definitely struggled as a pre-med here. One of the things that I had to work on was my GPA coming out of undergrad. I definitely felt overwhelmed, I think, by the large class sizes here and like trying to figure out how to study and trying to figure out how to be pre-med. And so struggled a little bit in my undergrad and then figured out how to study like better and like more efficiently after I graduated and did post-bac courses through UCLA Extension. So I actually worked full-time while taking UCLA Extension courses in the evenings and on weekends. I definitely struggled with the MCAT. I took the MCAT twice. So there were a couple things that I had to learn how to navigate. I think one of the things that really helped me was getting connected with more mentors, getting connected with medical students and faculty. I was part of the UCLA MedPep program. I'm involved with like the Mentor. Got support from Dr. David Hayes Bautista, who is the faculty advisor for Chicanos for Community Medicine here at UCLA. And it was like all of that mentorship and guidance that really helped me figure out how to study better you know, how to be a more competitive applicant for medical school. So those are some of the challenges that I faced. Cool. And I'll give my contact information as well. So if any of you are like thinking about like how to navigate some of those same challenges, if any of that resonates with you, you're welcome to connect with me. The next question, so as a pre-med, what were your greatest misconceptions about what being a medical student would be like? Maybe we can just follow that order. Barbara, would you be open to answering this question next?
I don't know if I've heard any misconceptions that were not true. The biggest one that everybody says is that when you start med school, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. And that definitely felt true, but you get used to it and you learn how to drink out of that fire hose. But I've had such a great time here. I really enjoyed myself that I can't really think of any other misconceptions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I think there's definitely some misconceptions about, you know, what actual doctoring is like, you know, day to day, you know, working in the hospital seeing patients. I think, you know, I think the expectations for a medical student were pretty much spot on. I think honestly, the biggest thing I would say is charting and just spending a lot of time writing notes. You don't really think about that when you're applying to medical school, but that's like 80–90% of the time that you're, you know, in clinic or whatever. You know, yes, it is patient care, but a lot of times it's doing the coordinating behind the scenes, doing the charting, documenting everything, because that's really, really important. That's something that I didn't think about, you know, about being a doctor. But, you know, about being a medical student, I think, you know, what's interesting is that unlike undergrad, you basically are focusing on one thing and one thing only at any given time. Instead of taking 5 or 6 different classes, you're really focusing on, let's say, one organ system, if that's how your medical school is organized, or whatever it is, and everyone's doing the same thing. So in a way, it's a little bit easier to focus. That being said, there's a lot of information, and definitely is a fire hose, and you know, it's difficult to keep up. But for me, coming from you know, a college where you were really forced to multitask and, you know, do all these different things, it was actually surprising how much free time I felt like I had. Granted, UCLA's lecture schedule is really light. I don't know how it is now, but when, you know, David and I were, you know, we did MS 1 and 2 back in 2011, 12, 13. You know, we basically had all entire afternoons off on Mondays and Fridays, which was very surprising. So you had a lot of time to do things outside of medicine that you were really passionate about as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think everybody's gonna be different. One thing that I think that that may seem like you need to know, I think it may seem like you need to know more about what you want with your career than you actually do need to know, if that makes sense. So, you know, I think some people come in and they are really passionate about a very specific field, like maybe it's cancer, or, you know, it could be GI with, you know, they had experiences that have like drawn them to those fields, or to surgery, you know. But I think other people, like, you know, won't have had that. And I didn't, you know, I had some vague ideas about what I wanted to do. And I think, you know, as a medical student, you actually have a lot of, you actually are almost expected to kind of want to explore. So nobody's going to kind of think about you as like a first-year medical student thinking that, oh, this person, you know, needs to know that they want to be an orthopedic surgeon. You definitely don't need to know that. And I think where the challenge of that is when you're applying to try to balance having a compelling reason to want to go to med school with kind of realizing that you shouldn't force yourself to have, you know, a plan when you don't have one. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess like it's okay to not know, and just to know that you want to be involved in medicine because you want that opportunity to give back to the community, to help people. And, you know, and you never know, like I thought I was going to go into psychiatry and I'm going into medicine, and, you know, so it can change, and that's absolutely fine.
And I can answer my misconceptions, I guess. I think maybe not misconceptions, but just like things that I didn't expect when I started medical school. One thing I didn't learn about until I was in medical school was how much of a role we play as educators. I always talk about how, you know, it's not just that we're educating well, like one of the biggest things is that you have to learn how to, you know, be an educator with your patients. And part of it is that you learn this language. It's a full language of medicine that you get during the 4 years that you're in medical school. And once you've learned that language, you need to be able to translate it and communicate it well with your patients. And so that is like a role that we play, is educating. And then the other is that there's a really great apprenticeship that happens in medicine where the like a second-year medical student teaches anatomy to first-year medical students. Third-year medical students teach second years. Interns will teach their third and fourth-year medical students, and attendings overall like teach all of us. So there's this apprenticeship, and I didn't realize until starting medical school that so much of our role is as educators, and then discovered that I really love that, and I love that aspect of medicine. So that was something I didn't know going into it. I think the other thing too is I didn't realize just how much like responsibility and trust we already get as medical students. I think like once we started our clinical clerkships and we have our white coat on and we're taking care of our patients, you realize how like very quickly that people are looking at you as like their doctor, and that was something that I didn't expect, even though we are very much supported, and there are people who are, analyzing our decisions and backing the decisions that we make. But I think that was one of the things that I didn't realize going into medicine, was that even as a medical student, we would already have a lot of opportunity to advocate for our patients and to do a lot of clinical work. Yeah, that's my response. Our next question is, what do you wish you would have understood about medical school that would have helped you throughout the process of preparing and applying? Barbara.
So there's this misconception that you have to have perfect grades in order to apply to med school, or you have to have a perfect MCAT score. But haven't been in admissions committees and seen it all. There's a holistic process in certain schools versus others. So I wish that I did apply, just, threw my hat in there, but I wish other people would apply as well, because it's not all just grades. It's not just all the MCAT, at least for some schools it's not. And so really understanding the mission of medical schools is very important. Really understanding what they're looking for, who they're trying to serve, and what their ideals are is very important. So even if you feel that you don't have the most excellent grades or the best MCAT score, know that in some schools it's a holistic process, and they will look at your application, and just make sure that whatever you do in your application, you're authentic to yourself, and you're very genuine in what you want to portray about yourself, because that's the most important thing you can possibly do, is be true to yourself. Otherwise you won't be happy at an institution that's not catering to your needs as well.
Yeah, with a grain of salt, obviously, and my path and David's path is more research focused. And so, when we applied, I think we applied to a much, narrower range of medical schools. And of course, for the physician scientist pathway, they're really looking for people that are passionate about, fundamental basic research. And they want to train people that can do that, but can also work with patients and translate what they discover in the laboratory to the clinic. I think the most important thing for me looking back, on the process, is really mentorship. And this is for every stage, also for residency, finding a faculty job, even beyond. Finding a mentor who can give you good advice, advocate for you, and they don't necessarily have to be a physician. Of course, it definitely helps, but finding someone that you really engage with. And also the second thing is really coming up with a narrative and story about yourself, who you are and what do you want. I think this also goes for applying to residency too, but applying to medical school, coming up with a concise narrative about what you want to accomplish in medicine, even though they don't hold you to that. It's really important. That's not something I quite realized until after, and helping people apply, countless undergrads that I mentored in my laboratory that apply to medical school, helping them shape a narrative based on what they wanted to do. And so, again, in terms of, scores and everything, that's, we kind of talked about that already. Some schools have cut off, some do not, but at the end of the day, it's really the whole package, and it's really the story that you have to tell. So that's really what you should spend your time working on. So.
I agree with that. I actually don't think I have that much to add, except for I saw there was a question in the chat that we'll probably get to later about specific activities, and I would echo what Ernest said, which I think is, which I'm interpreting as, it's not necessarily about like having your resume like 5 pages long, but rather like having the activities on there really mean something to you, and that you've learned something from them. And so I think probably as an undergrad, I tried to do a lot of things as opposed to really doing things that would teach me about what myself and what I wanted, and what I was interested in. And as a result, I spent some of that time during med school doing some of that learning about myself, which is fine too. But, I would just say that it's okay to have interests in certain things, and then maybe you don't have as much interest in research. And if you don't want to do research, you have other things that you're passionate about, and vice versa.
I would say for me, the things that I think would have helped me in the process of preparing and applying, I think one is I didn't recognize until I was in medical school just how different programs are. It's not just, and it includes a variety of different things. It's about, like what is the curriculum, like how is the curriculum structured, how is grading structured, how competitive is the student environment, how supported do you feel as a student, where are you matching, I think that there are a lot of questions that if I were to go through the process over again, and actually I kind of did with residency, I think it's so important to talk to students who are actually at the programs that you're applying to. If you can connect with folks, or you can ask the school to connect you with folks, just to get a better sense of what the student experience is actually like. I think the other thing I would also take into consideration is what is the type of community and clinical exposure that you're going to get. One of the things that I really loved about being here at UCLA was that we had really diverse clinical experiences. We rotate at different hospitals, including Ronald Reagan, which is a tertiary care center. We rotate at Olive View and Harbor, which are both county hospitals, and you're taking care of much more of an underserved, uninsured or underinsured population. And then we also rotate at the VA, so we're able to get exposure to what the veterans healthcare looks like and what that patient population looks like. And so I think if I were to go through now, I'd probably ask more questions about, what is the clinical training like? And am I going to be able to find mentors, who are doing the work that I'm interested in doing? That's one thing that I would do differently. But of course, when I was applying and I didn't know that, my whole focus was just to get into a medical school. And I think if you're more targeted in your approach, what community do you want to serve? What kind of medicine do you want to get exposed to? And you're doing research, it's a lot easier for you to answer that question of like, why are you interested in this particular medical school? So when they ask you that question on your interviews or in the application itself, you can be more specific. Well, I want to go to your medical school because this is a community you're serving and this is the kind of exposure that I want to get. The other thing that I would say is that I didn't know as much about the medical school admissions requirements, or MSAR. And that actually gives you information about who gets accepted into all of the different medical schools. They show you the 10th to 90th percentile for their MCAT scores for accepted students, as well as the GPAs for accepted students. So like if you're applying to a school where their 10th percentile for MCAT score is, a 518 and your score is like a 509, absolutely still apply if that's like a school that you really want to go to, but it sort of, it shows you a little bit about like how competitive you are for that particular program if their 10th percentile is really high. and so you want to apply to maybe a range of programs that are maybe your stats may not be as high as like their 10th to 90th percentile, but then also apply to programs where you're competitive for those schools with your scores and your GPA. Yeah, and if you have any questions about that as well, please again, put it in the Q&A and we'll try to get to it. The next question is, what did you do well in medical school with regard to studying and exams? What would you do differently? And Barbara?
So medical school is full of resources. It's not like undergrad where, you know, you're kind of trying to, it's just, there's so many resources. There's Anki Dex, there's Pathoma, there's First Aid, there's Sketchy, there's all these resources and everybody's happy to share them. And so that was a great part of med school, is that you never felt like you didn't know how to study, but you did feel as if you had way too many resources. And so trying to dissect what was important and what wasn't was very challenging. And so if I could do it all over again, especially with STEP, which is our boards, our first boards that we take, is to utilize Anki, which is kind of like flashcards, but it has this very cool algorithm that helps you retain information. So I would use that much more, and also not use as much. I think that trying to get through a lot of resources instead of focusing on one or two really well was very important. But it's definitely not studying like in undergrad versus studying in med school is completely different. In undergrad, I remember I just had to study for that final and it was done, it was over, and I had to forget about it. But med school really builds up throughout the years. And so it's not, you can't cram, you can't, you know, take a few days off and study nonstop. This information needs to stay with you forever. So, or until things are updated. So it's a very different way of studying. It's more, I need to study so I can help my patients versus I need to study so I can pass a test and get a good grade. So just the framework is a little bit different and your mindset is a little bit different.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. I think, you know, David and I were both tutors as part of the David Geffen School of Medicine tutoring program. And, you know, we work with a lot of different students. And one thing that really stood out to me was that, you know, everyone just has a different learning style and a way that studies that works for you. And you really have to take that time during your first year to figure out what works for you. Are you someone that likes doing flashcards? Are you someone that likes drawing out all these diagrams, a hybrid of both? Do you just want to do questions? You know, that's really more towards third and fourth year. But, you know, finding your streamlined workflow that works for you is honestly the most important thing. A lot of people will, you know, even though, you say you can't cram the night before, there's a lot of your classmates will be like, oh, I just read it the night before, I learned it immediately, I only have to read it once and I know it, you know, photographic memory. Some people need to see it 3 or 4 times to get it down. I was somewhere in the middle where, you know, I was very efficient with studying overall, but there are certain subjects that I really needed to have repetition in order to have memorization, those being anatomy, more than a lot of physiology, for example. So, you know, I went into anatomy lab very often with a friend of mine, who became a close friend, you know, just going to work with cadavers, you know, looking at the anatomy. That was probably the hardest part for medical school for me initially. And then, of course, for me transitioning from, you know, the way of thinking as an engineer and as a physicist to thinking about, you know, things via memorization was a little bit difficult. But, you know, figuring that out and then coming up with an efficient study schedule and plan and just never falling behind allowed me to really, you know, do well in all the exams at every stage. You know, little things like looking at the lectures that they send out the Sunday night before that week, for the entire week, just kind of glancing through, you know, taking some notes, spending that extra half an hour to prepare, and then, you know, showing up to lecture, asking good questions. To third and fourth year, you know, trying to juggle, you know, being at the hospital, sometimes 9 to 5, but sometimes 7 to 7, and then having to study right afterwards and just doing questions is definitely difficult. So I don't hesitate to reach out for help. whichever school you end up at, there's always going to be some kind of tutoring program. There's going to be a lot of support, both for anatomy as well as for the basic sciences and the clinical sciences as well. UCLA has a particularly strong tutoring program that's really gotten a lot better. David has done a lot of great work there, along with our new heads of the tutoring program. It was kind of in the earlier stages at the beginning. I remember when we started, but don't be afraid to reach out for help from classmates and administration. So everyone is here to help you succeed. So if you're struggling, definitely say something.
Yes, I agree. I think I'd make 2 points. The first point is that I echo what Ernest and Barbara both said, which is that it's always better to reach out for help, and there is help, a lot of help in a lot of different forms available. Reaching out earlier is never a bad idea, and you should, I think people want to help you succeed, and it's not failing to want to reach out. And the second point I would make is that, I don't want to make assumptions, but my remembrance of applying to med school is that grades are really important. MCAT's really important, and it can be really frustrating to have to kind of need to get a high GPA and need to get a good MCAT score to succeed in the application process. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is. I know that. And I don't want to, maybe the others will disagree with me, but I actually think that it's less the case in med school. So I just want to maybe offer a little bit of a ray of hope that, it's good to do well. It's good to get good board scores in med school, but like at the end of the day, it's about how connecting to your patients and being able to be there for them and manage like your work as a clinician. And so like, the top test score is just as good as somebody who I don't know. What I'm saying is that like test scores aren't everything. And so just rest assured that hopefully this isn't forever. And like, once you get in, there's some leeway. And I think, I don't know if you guys follow the news, but like they're actually moving a lot of our really important step exams, the board exams, which are kind of the equivalent of the MCAT, to pass fail, in a recognition nationwide that these tests are just too stressful. And so I hope it can be some encouragement that there are support structures in place to help people, but that also at the end of the day, how good of a doctor you are is like way more than just how good you can score on shelf exams and step exams. And if you get good grade, like you don't have to be the top grade earner in the class. You can be a good doctor without that. I think that's an important point to make.
I guess I need to answer the question as well. So what I did well in medical school, I think I had to learn how to study and didn't realize actually until midway through, because there's a heavy memorization component in medical school. Didn't realize that Anki, which Barbara talked about, which is a flashcard, a free flashcard software that you can download, that Anki would actually be really useful for me as a learner, for my learning style. I like to do a combination of Anki flashcards in addition to practice questions and really test myself to learn the material. And that made a huge difference for me and really helped me be more efficient in the way that I tackled my studies. So that I think is one of the things that I did well. Like once I figured that out, it's like both what I did well and like what I would do differently. Other things that I think I could have done more of, I wish that I had asked for help more. I was also a tutor in the tutoring program. And so I was always very happy to help folks with the things that I had figured out and the things that I had navigated, but hardly ever would seek support for myself until it was like very apparent that I really needed help. And I think that I should have utilized those resources earlier. I would definitely suggest talking to upperclassmen, people who are even just a year ahead of you, because they've just taken all of the same exams that you're about to take, and it's fresh in their memory, and they can speak to what resources they've used and what worked for them. So I think that's something that I would do differently or just do more of if I were to do medical school over again. Our next question is, how did you take care of your emotional and mental health in medical school?
So I love swimming, and one of the things of living in New York City is that it's very limited finding a pool that's also affordable. So I started the swim club here and got the school to pay for it. And so I really had a lot of fun doing that. And our curriculum is such that it's pass, no pass, and there's certain caveats to that, but ultimately I didn't feel as pressured that I had to have like 100% on my test or be the very, very best. It's one of those things that it's more collaborative when you get to medical school. And so I felt like learning was fun, and it wasn't something that you needed to memorize and regurgitate. It was a process. So that was very different. And so having that in the back of my mind that I don't have to be perfect, I will make mistakes, and it's all part of the process, made me less anxious and less of a, striving for something that's not really something that is meaningful to me. And like what David also said earlier about, it's more about caring for your patients. You get a boost of energy after a long day when you have helped a patient, even if it's something as simple as interpreting Spanish, or being with somebody that is from your same culture. So I'm from Guatemala. And so when I, took care of these patients that have never really interacted with someone from the same community, it just gives you such a boost for those long days. I'm also married, so my husband's here with me, and he completely understands the process. And so that was such a huge support network. But I'm also very far from family since I'm originally from California. And so I developed a really good support system here at my school with my classmates. We're a very small school. It's about 100 of us for our year, and that doesn't include the MD PhDs. So you really become a family here, and I think that's the most important part of this entire journey, is that you have these people that you will forever call family, and that really gets you through medical school much, much easier than anything else, really.
Yeah, let's see. So for me, my mindset coming into med school, because I was doing the MD PhD program, it was really thinking about the whole process as a marathon instead of a sprint. I think, the way that the program is structured, you do 2 years of medical school, you do your entire PhD, and then you come back, transition to the clinical years of medical school, and then you apply to residency. I think for me, I'm someone that fairly deals with stress very well, but I tried not to compromise on the things that I really enjoyed in life, which were eating well and sleeping enough. I think those things, can often fall by the wayside during this entire process. Even during clinical rotations and obviously during grad school, I always made sure to sleep 8 to 9 hours a night because that's how much I needed to feel efficient, feel rested, things like that. Obviously, there will be times where you're going to be on call, you're going to be 24 hours, but eventually you figure out ways to recharge. I think having a lot of college classmates that were still in the area was really awesome because those were my closest friends. A lot of them are still in the area. I obviously made a lot of friends in medical school that eventually graduated and left because they were just doing the regular MD program. I think the hardest parts were really, the last year of graduate school and transitioning back from the lab to the clinic. Those were probably the most difficult times. I think that, reaching out to the support of all the people that have come before you that have gone through that was very helpful. Like other MD PhD students 1 to 2 years ahead of me, helping, walk you through the path of what you need to get done. It's hard to predict and see, what's going to happen. So yeah, I think, having that in place, just having a support network is incredibly important, and just make sure to do the things that you need to do to make sure that you're happy. So.
Yeah, I again agree. I think, I just think related to my last response that, I don't know, I guess if I had to divide, I think med school, of course, is divided in kind of in half, and there's the first half that's preclinical, that's kind of classroom, that feels more like college, and a lot of places are now reducing that from 2 years to 1.5 or to 1. But regardless, and then the other half is the clinical stuff where you're doing your core rotations, and then in the hospital and in the clinic all the time. And I don't know, I don't want to like give. I just think that you cannot. I just wouldn't let med school or the classroom learning or just like these tests and all this stuff like take over your life. I think that this is your 20s or your 30s, and you just have to live and grow as a person too. And so I don't know. I think that like if you, especially in the classroom stuff, if you take time and like don't study on a Sunday and just go do something, I think it is so much more important to just take time for yourself and realize that like you're a person that's alive, and you should enjoy being like in a new city and with new friends and doing all that, and not, I don't know, it feels dumb to say not take it too seriously, because that's easier said than done, but I guess just like try to keep everything in perspective. And there are going to be times that are extremely difficult. I think that the time I was on the surgery clerkship was very challenging, and I didn't really have a lot of time to do things that made me feel alive, quote unquote. But if you, I don't know, I guess just like the perspective that you have, recognizing that you're there for a reason, that you are doing this because you want to be doing it. And if you take some time for yourself and maybe come back and learn something later, then that is okay. I think it gave me the energy to kind of work through the challenging times, knowing that was the time that I wanted to buckle down and really use that experience, because that's the only time I'm going to do surgery, really use that experience to learn what I wanted to learn. And then recognize that, you don't have to be an absolute perfect physician at the end of med school. That's not what it's for. It's to have a good basis and understanding of what you want to do next, and the foundation to succeed in internship. But in residency, your nothing you do is not overlooked by somebody else. And so you have more time to learn. That's what I would say.
For me, I think one of the things that I did was I really prioritized my time with I'm also married, so I really prioritized my time with my husband as well as my time with my family, and I just built it into my schedule. I knew that there were specific days that I would dedicate it, or like specific days in the month, or afternoons or evenings that would be dedicated to time with the people that I really cared about. And that was one of the biggest things that helped me get through medical school. One of the things that also helped my emotional and mental health was I would do these walks with my husband every night. The UCLA campus is really beautiful, and so every night we would have dinner together, and then we would take a walk, and that would be like one of my ways of decompressing after everything that I had done for the day. And yeah, I think just like finding that support within your social network. I'm also I'm just a huge advocate for taking care of your mental health, huge advocate for getting therapy if you need it. There's a lot of resources at UCLA to get help if you need it. So I would suggest like just taking advantage of what resources are available to you. The last question that we have here for the panelists before we try to answer some more of the Q&As that are in here. I'm trying to type some answers to my co-panelists. You're welcome to type answers as well. But the last question is, what made you a competitive applicant for the specialty you matched in? What did you do well to prepare yourself for the specialty, and what would you do differently? Barbara?
So I'm going into emergency medicine, and the mission of EM is to always serve underserved, regardless of your ability to pay, immigration status, race, gender, creed, anything. So that spoke to me very deeply, and it's just at the core of my being that it was just the perfect fit for me. I also thrive under pressure. I'm not really sure if that's a good thing after a while. But I don't like being in loud spaces or hectic places. So that also fit well with that. And what made me competitive? I honestly feel that it was just that that's just the core. the mission for EM and the mission in my life go hand in hand. And so I didn't really have to sell myself. You know, during med school, I was very active in health clinics, and I was very active in immigrant rights, also women's rights. And so it was just natural to apply to this field, and it was just natural to talk about these social justice issues that are affecting us and clearly still affecting us. So I didn't really do anything to prepare for this specialty. I think it's different than other specialties where they require you to do research if you want to go to like competitive things like ortho or derm or plastics. EM is kind of this field that if this is your core and this is your mission in life, then they will welcome you with open arms. Step scores, some programs do have a cutoff. Some programs are a little more competitive than others, but you will always find some place to match. And that's probably not even remotely in your train of thought right now. It's more of med school related. Just know that when you find that field that you want to be in, you will be able to join it. It could be later in med school, early, it doesn't matter. The point is you don't have to make up your mind right now. There's always a way to get to where you want to be.
Agreed. So I matched in dermatology. I was thankfully matched in my dream program at UCSF. Again, because I did the MD PhD program, you know, I was really applying for research track focused spots where they're really aiming to train physician scientists in dermatology. I think, you know, what's interesting is that, like Barbara just said, you know, when you come into medical school, you might have an idea of what you want to do, but I had zero idea I wanted to do dermatology. In fact, I was like, I'm never going to apply to that. I was interested in neuroscience, maybe psychiatry, maybe medicine. And it wasn't really until graduate school where I started doing research and just randomly studying autoimmune skin diseases where I made a switch, where I loved the scientific problems regarding inflammation in the skin. And then when I went back to third and fourth year, I ended up working closely with these patients through opportunities that I had through National Psoriasis Foundation and others like the Rheum Derm Society. So, you know, the path that you set out doesn't necessarily end up the one that you apply to many times. You know, what made me competitive, I think, you know, MD PhDs in general are very competitive for specialties because you really bring a unique aspect to the program. You can do basic science research or any other kind of research, translational research, as well as provide outstanding patient care and really bridging the gap between the two, which there is still a great need for in many specialties, especially in dermatology. To be extremely competitive, you know, dermatology is very difficult to match into regardless whether you're an MD PhD student or not. Like it or not, you know, there are really high cutoffs for board scores, unfortunately. Some schools have abolished that. Like I know UCSF explicitly said that they don't look at step 1 score, but they do care about step 2 CK, which is sort of one of the later ones that you take during your third year. Some schools de-emphasize it, but unfortunately, by and large, you know, the numbers do matter. That being said, your story matters a lot too. And everything that I talked about, coming up with a narrative for what you want to accomplish in medicine when you're applying as a pre-med to medical school applies for residency as well. Coming up with a story that aligns with who you are and your mission statement in life, as well as what you want to accomplish. For me, I want to engineer new therapies for debilitating autoimmune skin diseases like cutaneous lupus, scleroderma, you know, working with these patients, looking at how poor their quality of life is, especially in underserved populations. That drove me to want to study these in the lab and then work with these patients in the clinic. So, you know, I built a story around that, and I think programs really, really engage with that. So, you know, I think I actually wouldn't really do anything differently. I think I had amazing mentors clinically and scientifically that helped me shape sort of this narrative. Of course, you know, it's a story that I came up on my own, but having mentors that was able to ask questions to and bounce ideas off of, as well as preparing for the interviews. Finding those mentors are really important. So I wouldn't do anything different, but I'm very grateful for having matched in this specialty, and I'm excited for the road ahead. So
I think my answer is kind of, I did the MD PhD, and I was talking earlier about kind of thinking about your path and what you're interested in, and I did a lot of that more in med school. And so for me, I did a PhD in neuroscience, and then I applied internal medicine. So if I were to do something differently, I think I love my lab and I love the project that I did, but I probably wouldn't do a PhD in neuroscience, which is probably not that helpful to people that are not applying MD PhD. But I guess like what the thing that it led to was it goes back to the point, I forget who made it, about your story. Maybe Ernest was talking about this, right? Where like you have to do it for med school, and like, you're gonna have, like, I did undergrad and like maybe I had some other experiences and this is why I want to go to med school, and then you have to do it again when you apply to residency, and even more specific because now I want to do internal medicine, or I want to do surgery, or I want to do psychiatry, and you have to think about what are the experiences that you have that led you to that decision. And it's absolutely okay to have things like in my case where I was kind of on the neurology path or the psychiatry path, and then I switched in third year. But it would have been a lot easier if I thought more about, if I had had the opportunity to learn about what I wanted to do clinically and broadly speaking before I did a PhD. And so I guess directing your things, like looking for things that you're passionate in as opposed to just things that are going to be like helping your resume, that's one thing that can help you make that decision earlier. And like very specifically for me, a lot of like our program and a lot of programs now have you do some clinical experience before you go into your PhD. And I think that would have really helped me. And again, if you're thinking about MD PhD, please reach out later. But somebody asked in the chat like how you decided your specialty, and for me at least, it was almost entirely based on my third year rotations, because being there in the team with the team did more than I could have ever experienced setting or in undergrad for sure. So that really helped. And I guess just thinking about stories, and don't do activities just to do them because there's something that you're really interested in. And even the things that I did that don't relate to what I'm going to do now, I learned something from all of them. Like I would not change my PhD experience, having done the PhD, for anything, because I just learned so much about myself during that time.
I think we're almost done. I think so I can quickly answer this question. So what made me a competitive applicant for the specialty I matched in? I think what I'm gonna echo what a lot of people say, like do things because you're really passionate about what you're doing. Like I wouldn't just do things to become competitive. And also it sort of helps you shape like what your career is going to look like. So for me, the things that I'm really passionate about are working with communities that are vulnerable for different reasons, undocumented, uninsured, people coming from just like really diverse backgrounds, but who may not have equitable access to healthcare. So that's something that I'm really passionate about. And I am also really passionate about medical education. And so those interests, because I'm interested in those things, I did a lot of community service specific to that throughout the time that I was in medical school and even before I started medical school. And I think it was all of those experiences that actually made me competitive for the program that I got into. And UCSF specifically, which is where I matched, was my top choice because it has such a strong medical education program, and because the program that I'm going into is specifically geared, like their whole curriculum is geared towards understanding how to care for vulnerable communities. And so I think it's a match, like that's why they call it a match, because your interests, your career choices should match what the program is going to give you. So even if you have, like even if I had, I don't know, the top board scores or whatever, like if I hadn't had that community service, that, medical education background that I had already demonstrated throughout med school, I probably wouldn't have been a competitive applicant for this program specifically. I was competitive because it's giving me everything that I was already looking for and that I was already doing. I would say other things to do. to prepare yourself. Try and find mentors. I think one of the nice things about being in medical school is it actually does make it a little bit easier to connect with faculty. Not that you can't do it as an undergrad. I absolutely think you should start getting exposure as an undergrad if you can develop those relationships. But in med school, it was just so easy to be like, I want to get exposed to this. I want to get exposed to that. And I would just be let in. And I'll give an example that's not my specialty, but a lot of my classmates who were interested in surgery, even in their first and second years of medical school, before we were doing our clinical clerkships on medicine or on surgery, had already found mentors who will allow them to scrub into surgical cases. So I think like getting yourself exposed to.
You can tell them I'm in a meeting that I'll be with them if you want to listen. I really. Oh, sorry. So one of the things that you can do, again, is establish those relationships with faculty who are doing the things that you're interested in, and that will also help prepare you because you'll know what you're getting into, and they can mentor and advise you on what types of things you can do to become competitive, or pull you into the research that they're doing so that you can be more competitive for that specialty. I believe it is already 1 o'clock. I want to thank all of the panelists who are here and who have carved out time today to answer questions. I'm going to drop, I know that we tried to answer questions as they were streaming in. I'm going to drop my email address here. If any of you have additional questions, you're welcome to connect with me. And the other thing I'll mention is, again, please go to the Ask the Med Mentors form if you have additional questions. And that's it. Stacy, do you have anything else? Or do my panelists have anything else?
No.
This is Stacy. I don't have anything else to add. I'm going to stop the recording, but if anybody's waiting for an answer to anything in the Q&A or chat, I'm typing a couple things in the chat still. Feel free to stay on until your answer appears. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and end the session at this time. Thank you all.